Yeah, I would say that we're seeing a decrease. Definitely the hedge trees are vanishing. If they're, I mean, a big hedge tree they're not going to get to, we'll probably either have to cut that down or spray it, one of the two. The littler hedge trees they'll get to, we've seen completely, sumac is just completely gone. It's obliterated in the first year. Buckbrush is a work in progress. By the fall, they normally have it stripped. It'll take a few years. Goats are mostly a browser, but they do eat some forbs, which would be some wildflowers and some of those kind of things. They'll just barely graze on some grass. I mean, if we're in the middle of winter, they'll graze on some of that native cool season grasses that grow in some of the draws and stuff. For the most part, they stay away from the grass. They do pick quite a few forbs, but for the most part, their favorite is all browse. No, we mow. The problem with goats is if they get on your lawn, they will eat your rose bushes and eat your wife or mom's flowers.
They won't bother your grass, they'll eat the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So that's one of the things that was on the contract. The first year that I got goats, the old neighbor that I worked for, we made up a little contract, and it was, I don't remember, 6 or 10 goats, and we both signed it, and we had the log on the back that had the hours that we'd work, and he wrote in his own handwriting, "Not responsible for Pat or Beth's flowers." And so it was in the contract, and he made sure. So, yeah, no, they're not the lawnmower. And all the books you read that they'll eat anything, it's as far from true as you can get. If they're bored, they may chew on stuff, but they won't eat it. I mean, when you're out in the pasture, they are extremely picky. They eat all day because it takes them so long to eat, because they use their lips and their tongue, and on a hedge tree, they will pick each individual leaf. And on a lot of that stuff, they will. Now, sometimes they'll kind of grab, and like a grater or something, they'll grab down and they'll just run it through their teeth and pull all the leaves off. But a lot of times you think they're grazing. Like when we first started, we thought they were eating grass because their heads are down, sometimes kind of low, and they're down there going like this. When you get up close and watch them, they were getting some of the forbs that were coming up, but they were using their nose and they were moving the grass away, and then they'd just grab the leaf of the forb. But they are extremely picky and seasonal. I've said that they graze in circles, but a lot of times they don't hardly touch. They'll graze on it, but they don't really demolish cerisa until fall. The sumac was a fall thing. Cedar trees are a winter thing. They have their favorites in their calendar, and they know what it is. Very picky. Trained, it's all off instinct. The only way that you train them is really curb bad behavior. And they have basically what's called an imprinting period, which is somewhere from 6 weeks to about 12 or 16 weeks. Normally what they're with at that time is what they're going to guard. And so if it's with your kid, they're going to be guarding your kid. If it's with just your farm animals, they're going to guard that. If it's with goats, it's goats, cattle, cattle. We did have a little bit of trouble when we first started incorporating the goats back in with the cows, because the dogs thought that the cows were a threat. So we had to kind of work through that. Now the dogs are pretty comfortable with the cows. I mean, if the cows come curiously running up and charge and stuff, the dogs might bark. The dogs might bark anyways if they're coming by, but we don't see any chasing, any really bad behavior. So when I first started, we would go out every day and feed the dogs, which really isn't feasible. It's not good for the pasture because you're driving over it to find them. It's expensive on repairs, it's expensive on gas. So we've started transitioning over the last 3 or 4 years to dog food feeders, and they've learned that pretty well. So I go out once a week or so and fill dog food feeders. And the only problem with that is you have to be careful. The goats can learn those, and the goats can like dog food. And so one of my pastures, the goats know it, and so I have to have a cage around it and teach the dogs to go to it. This pasture behind the house, the goats haven't figured it out, and so I just leave it out and the dogs come and eat it. Dogs and goats, just like the cattle, we have ponds and creeks. We're really blessed with the way our water situation is situated. They have access to really good water and ponds and stuff. We have quite a few springs that feed ponds, that feed creeks. The only time that we ever got really close on water was in that 2010 through 12 period. and we actually didn't run out of water. There were a few ponds and some pastures that got really close, but we didn't have to haul any water, so we're really blessed in that way. And so they just find the water when they need it. A lot of people have trouble with worms in goats. We don't have a lot of trouble so far anyway, and that's because on our place they get to graze or browse as they naturally would, which is knee high or somewhere in that range. When you start grazing goats like you would graze cattle is when you're going to start seeing a worm problem, because those worms stay low to the ground between 1 to 4 or 5 inches off on a blade of grass. So when we start getting down below about 6 inches, we know that we very likely could start to see a worm problem. There's several cultures that I would say influence it. Hispanic is one of them. Jewish and Muslim holidays, a lot of times from about October to April or maybe even May. I'm not a scholar on all the different holidays, but I know that you have, I think it's Ramadan, and a whole bunch from November to the spring of the year. You have a whole bunch of Muslim, Jewish, and the Hispanic ethnicities all really. And the other thing is that time of the year is when the holidays are, but it's also when the goats are the hardest to get, because a lot of people do what I do and kid in the spring and sell somewhere between late spring through the summer, and so the demand is high in the fall and the supply may not be there. And so that's why that market really goes up for those two reasons. At least that's what I understand to be true about the market. There are special goat sales. There's in Oklahoma, there's the Chickasaw Meat Company, I think is what it's called, and it's not even an auction. They weigh them, they give you what the USDA is saying it's worth, which it intrigues a lot of people because you don't have the rigmarole of some sales. For my culls, I normally take to a sale, and it's just a sale barn. It's normally in the evening because a lot of goat producers don't do it full time, and so they have day jobs, and so they take them in the evening. A lot of my sales for my females are replacement nannies, and then I actually, the last year, and hopefully to continue on because of the numbers I have, I'm hoping to sell private treaty here at the house. Last year I had a guy just come and pick them up, and then we go and weigh them at the nearby scales, and then we just agree on a price, and it takes a lot of the hard part of marketing out, and you don't have to worry as much about shrink and loss as you do. Like when I take goats to a sale barn, I'm probably going to have to, if the sales normally start at 6 or 6:30, I'm going to have to start getting them in sometime early afternoon to get the sorting done, to get them loaded. The sales aren't nearly as frequent as cattle are, so there's like this sale barn that I take to have 2 a month, and they're way more spread out. They aren't nearly as dense, and so you have farther to travel. I have about an hour and a half drive, and so when you put those goats, anytime you put the goats on a trailer, you have a chance for loss. You're definitely losing pounds because of shrinkage, and so for me, my best option is to sell them in the country here. So that's what I try to do. A mature nanny will very often have twins. That's what we shoot for. The old saying that I've heard is a single pays the bill, twins is just extra profit, and triplets is a headache. And that's what I've found to be true most of the time. There are some mature nannies that can handle triplets, but for the most part I prefer twins. That's really the ideal situation, is a set of twins. As long as she has a single, she's going to stay, because like I said, because we run the cattle and the goats together, one of them gets to be there rent-free, and so my goats don't have a whole lot of input monetarily speaking that I have to do. I do a few vaccinations, and the dog food is really the biggest cost for my guardian dogs, and so there's not a whole lot of cost there anyways, and so there's a high rate of profitability if things go like they should or like you hope without any hiccups. And so a single really does do more than pay the bill as long as it's a good single. So the cattle are in their rotations. and the goat fence is normally just the perimeter. We just put the goat fence around the perimeter. So the goats have the run of the place. They can do whatever they want. So the cattle and the goats can definitely be in the same pastures at the same time. I've found, and I'm actually okay with it, some people try to get the species to merge and really graze together depending on your system. The way I found is they're normally kind of like opposite ends of a magnet. As the cows move into a pasture, the goats kind of move out. But I actually prefer that because what that does is that forces the goats to graze more evenly. And so as we move the cows around, the goats kind of move around too. So if they're, like today, they're hanging out over there, and by the weekend, we're going to move these cows into there, and so that'll probably move the goats to the north pasture, where they haven't been yet because the kids are young, and so we just turned them back out, and so that's going to force them up north. And then when the cows move there, it'll probably bring the goats back around, and so hopefully we get a little more even graze with the goats. Because as the kids get older and they start tracking with mom better, goats typically graze in a circle, and that's how we like it to be, because they started right up here behind the house, and those hedge trees were completely stripped. But like we want, those hedge trees are starting to pop those leaves back out, and so here before long we want the goats to come back by and strip that next crop of leaves, because that just stresses the plant even more to the breaking point where they eventually die. So if you'd like to contact me, we're on Facebook at Plum Creek Ranch or at PCR Goats. I also have a website, and there's a link to that on the Facebook page, so you can find that very easy.